believed he was dealing with an Iranian general. The FBI recorded everything. The DEA set up the entire operation. And when investigators finally pieced together what they'd uncovered, it changed how intelligence agencies view modern criminal organizations forever. This isn't just about one man. This is about a network that spans from Myanmar's ethnic insurgent groups to the streets of New York, to the highest levels of international weapons trafficking. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this case terrifies intelligence agencies worldwide, why it keeps diplomats awake at night, and why what happened next could reshape global security. But first, you need to understand who these men really are, because what you think you know about the Yakuza is about to change completely. Before we continue, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. Are you in Tokyo where these organizations operate, New York where the FBI built their case, or somewhere else entirely? This story has reached every corner of the globe, and I'm curious to see just how far it extends. Takeshi Ebisawa doesn't look like your typical international arms dealer. At 60 years old, this soft-spoken Japanese man built something that law enforcement had never seen before. A criminal network stretching from the back alleys of Tokyo to the mountains of Myanmar, all the way to the streets of Manhattan. For years, the Drug Enforcement Administration had been tracking him. They knew he was moving heroin. They knew he was trafficking weapons, but they had no idea what they were really dealing with. In 2020, Ebisawa made contact with someone he believed was a weapons trafficker, someone who could help him move his most dangerous merchandise. What Ebisawa didn't know, he was talking to an undercover DEA agent. The agent played his role perfectly. He gained Ebisawa's trust, he met with his associates, and slowly, carefully, he worked his way into the inner circle of one of Japan's most dangerous criminal organizations. Then came the photographs. Dark, rocky substances laid out on tables. Geiger counters positioned next to them. The needles jumping, the readings climbing. Ebisawa wasn't just showing off his inventory, he was proving its authenticity. These materials came from Myanmar, he told the undercover agent. From mining operations controlled by ethnic insurgent groups. He was calm, matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. But what drives a man to traffic nuclear materials? What makes someone cross that line from traditional organized crime into weapons of mass destruction? The answer lies in desperation. The Yakuza have been under pressure like never before. Traditional revenue streams drying up. Government crackdowns intensifying. Some organizations started looking for new ways to generate income. Ebisawa saw an opportunity that others wouldn't touch. He believed he was dealing with an Iranian general, someone who would pay top dollar for uranium, someone who would trade surface-to-air missiles for plutonium, someone who would help him rebuild his organization's financial empire. The FBI had no idea how deep this conspiracy went. Myanmar, a country torn apart by civil war. Ethnic insurgent groups fighting for control of remote territories, and hidden in those mountains, uranium mines operating outside any government oversight. This wasn't some small-scale operation. Ebisawa had connections with rebel leaders who controlled entire mining regions. These weren't criminals looking to make quick money. These were armed groups funding their wars through the most dangerous materials on Earth. The insurgent leader Ebisawa worked with had been mining uranium for years, selling it to anyone willing to pay. No questions asked. No background checks. No consideration for where it might end up or what it might be used for. But Ebisawa had found a buyer who would pay premium prices, someone he believed was General Ali Reza, a high-ranking Iranian military officer with connections to the country's nuclear program. The general didn't exist. He was another DEA creation. Another undercover agent playing a role that would expose the full extent of this network. The deal was simple. Iran would get uranium and weapons-grade plutonium. In exchange, Ebisawa would receive American-made surface-to-air missiles, military-grade weapons that could shoot down commercial aircraft, weapons that could change the balance of power in Myanmar's civil war. But the transaction went further than that. Ebisawa was also moving massive quantities of heroin and methamphetamine into the United States. 500 kilograms of each. Street value, tens of millions of dollars. All of it funding weapons purchases that would flow back to Southeast Asian conflict zones. Think about what this means. Nuclear materials from Myanmar, weapons from America, drugs flooding into New York, money flowing to Iranian contacts, all coordinated by a single criminal organization. Intelligence agencies around the world were tracking this case. The CIA briefed the White House. Interpol shared information across dozens of countries. Diplomats held emergency meetings about nuclear proliferation. Because if Ebisawa could do this, if one Yakuza leader could build this kind of network, how many others were out there? How many other organizations had access to materials that could level city blocks? The case kept diplomats awake at night because it proved something terrifying. The traditional boundaries between organized crime and international terrorism were disappearing. Criminal groups were now trafficking in weapons that could kill hundreds of thousands of people. But this was only the beginning of what investigators found. Let me tell you how the Yakuza really operates in 2025. Forget everything you've seen in movies. Forget the tattoos and missing fingers and honor codes. Those are relics of a different era. Today's Yakuza wear business suits. They carry briefcases instead of swords. They operate legitimate companies that generate billions of dollars in revenue. Construction firms, real estate agencies, investment companies, entertainment businesses. But here's what makes them so dangerous. Every single one of these businesses serves a dual purpose. On the surface, they're completely legal, profitable, respectable. Underneath, they're money laundering operations on a scale that would make Wall Street executives jealous. Take a construction company in Tokyo. It bids on government contracts. It employs hundreds of workers. It pays taxes. It contributes to the economy. But it also processes drug money from Southeast Asia. It finances weapons purchases in Myanmar. It funnels cash to criminal organizations across 3 continents. The financial networks these groups have built are staggering. Bank accounts in Switzerland, shell companies in the Cayman Islands, real estate holdings in London, cryptocurrency exchanges in Singapore. They move money across borders faster than most governments can track it. Their international reach has expanded far beyond Japan. Yakuza-connected businesses operate in every major financial center: Hong Kong, Dubai, Frankfurt, New York. They have partnerships with criminal organizations on every continent. The Russian Mafia, Italian-American crime families, Mexican cartels, Chinese triads. This isn't just crime anymore. This is international business conducted by people who happen to be criminals. And law enforcement? They're struggling to keep up. Traditional policing focuses on individual crimes, drug busts, weapons seizures, violence. But modern Yakuza operations are designed to avoid all of that. They don't need to move drugs through customs when they own import companies. They don't need to launder money through cash businesses when they control investment firms. They don't need to bribe officials when they have legitimate political connections. Police departments are organized by jurisdiction: local crimes, national crimes, international crimes. But these organizations operate across all 3 levels simultaneously. By the time one agency figures out what's happening, the operation has moved to a different country with different laws and different investigators. The Ebisawa case was unusual because it involved nuclear materials. That got everyone's attention: intelligence agencies, military officials, diplomats. But for every Ebisawa making headlines, there are dozens of other bosses running quieter operations that generate far more money with far less risk. While Ebisawa made headlines, other bosses perfected quieter methods. Let me tell you about a different kind of crime. One that doesn't involve nuclear materials or international weapons deals. One that targets the most vulnerable people in society. Elderly Japanese women living alone. Widows with life savings sitting in bank accounts. Grandmothers who trust voices on the telephone because they sound like family. The phone rings. "Grandmother, it's me. "Your grandson. I'm in trouble. I need money quickly. Please don't tell my parents." The voice sounds familiar, desperate, young. The caller knows personal details, names of family members, recent events. Enough information to convince a confused elderly woman that this really is her grandson calling for help. "I was in an accident, grandmother. I hit someone with my car. The police are here. I need 3 million yen for bail money. Can you wire it to this account number?" This is called special fraud in Japan, and it generated more money for organized crime groups than drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and human trafficking combined. The Suiyoshikai perfected this system. They created call centers with hundreds of employees, professional scripts, databases of elderly targets, training programs for the callers, quality control supervisors, performance metrics. They weren't just stealing money. They were destroying families. Elderly victims lost their life savings. Their relationships with real family members became strained because trust had been shattered. Some victims never recovered psychologically from the betrayal. But here's what made this case different. For the first time in Japanese legal history, the bosses running these organizations were held personally responsible for crimes committed by their subordinates. Isao Seki was the leader of the Suiyoshikai. He never made phone calls to elderly victims. He never collected money from bank accounts. He never personally defrauded anyone. But a court ruled that he was responsible for the crimes his organization committed. The Supreme Court upheld a 7 million yen compensation order. Seki and his predecessor had to pay victims, even though they had no direct involvement in the fraud operations. This legal precedent changed everything. It meant that Yakuza bosses could no longer hide behind layers of subordinates. They could no longer claim ignorance about what their organizations were doing. The law now recognized that these groups operate as unified criminal enterprises with clear command structures. But understanding how those command structures work requires looking at something most people never consider. How do imprisoned bosses maintain control over their organizations? The answer is both simple and terrifying. They adapt. Messages pass through lawyers. Orders get transmitted through family visits. Financial decisions get made through coded phone calls. The organizational hierarchy continues functioning even when the top leadership is behind bars. Prison officials monitor communications. They record phone calls. They screen visitors. They intercept mail. But criminal organizations have had decades to develop workarounds for all of these security measures. A boss doesn't need to say, "commit fraud" in a phone call. He can ask about his grandson's school performance and communicate the same message to someone who understands the code. A visitor doesn't need to carry written instructions. They can wear specific clothing colors that signal different operations to watching subordinates. The fraud operations targeting elderly victims continued running smoothly, even after their leaders were arrested. New victims, new schemes, new ways to extract money from vulnerable people. Prison bars don't stop these organizations. They adapt. Let me walk you through how a Yakuza boss runs a billion-dollar criminal empire from a prison cell. First, communication. Every prison call is monitored. Every visitor is screened. Every piece of mail gets inspected. But Yakuza leaders have been perfecting coded communication for decades. A boss calls his wife and asks about their daughter's piano lessons. To anyone listening, it sounds like a normal family conversation. But piano lessons means drug shipments. Daughter's performance refers to profit margins. Teacher recommendations are instructions for money laundering operations. Legal visits provide another communication channel. Lawyers can meet with clients privately. Those conversations are protected by attorney-client privilege. A criminal organization simply ensures that some of their lawyers are willing to carry messages that go far beyond legal advice. Then, there's succession planning. When Kenichi Shinoda was imprisoned from 2005 to 2011, he didn't leave his organization rudderless. He appointed Kiyoshi Takayama as his second-in-command. Takayama made all major decisions. He represented Shinoda at important meetings. He ensured that operations continued running smoothly. But when Takayama was also imprisoned, the organization had backup plans for the backup plans. Regional leaders stepped up. Financial managers took on expanded roles. The power structure simply shifted without ever collapsing. Revenue streams continue flowing because these organizations built systems that don't depend on individual leadership. Real estate investments generate rental income automatically. Legitimate businesses continue operating under professional management. Investment portfolios produce returns that get reinvested in legal enterprises. The illegal operations also continue. Drug networks run by middle management. Fraud schemes overseen by regional supervisors. Money laundering handled by financial specialists. The bosses set policies and overall direction, but they don't micromanage daily operations. But here's what keeps law enforcement officials awake at night: corruption. Prison guards who look the other way during visitor meetings. Officials who provide information about ongoing investigations. Staff members who accept payments for small favors that enable larger operations. It doesn't require major corruption. A guard who allows an extra 5 minutes during a phone call. A mail clerk who doesn't inspect certain packages as carefully. A visiting room supervisor who happens to be distracted during crucial conversations. These small compromises add up to communication networks that operate inside supposedly secure facilities. International monitoring makes this even more complex. When a Yakuza boss in Tokyo communicates with associates in Bangkok, those messages cross multiple jurisdictions. Japanese authorities track domestic communications. Thai police monitor their territory. But the handoff between agencies creates gaps that criminal organizations exploit. Intelligence sharing between countries happens slowly. Legal requests take months to process. By the time one country's police figure out what's happening, the operation has moved to a different jurisdiction with different laws and different investigators. The Yakuza have also learned to leverage legal protections designed for legitimate businesses, corporate privacy laws, banking secrecy regulations, attorney-client privilege, international trade agreements. All of these create legal barriers that slow down investigations and protect criminal operations. Law enforcement agencies started developing new approaches: real-time intelligence sharing, joint task forces spanning multiple countries, financial monitoring systems that track money movements across borders, digital surveillance that intercepts coded communications. But just as authorities adapted their methods, the criminal organizations adapted theirs. What law enforcement discovered next changed everything. The Ebisawa case opened a door that intelligence agencies had hoped would stay closed forever. It proved that nuclear materials are available to anyone willing to pay the right price. Think about what this means for global security. If a Yakuza leader in Japan can source weapons-grade plutonium from Myanmar, who else has access to these materials? What other criminal organizations have connections to uranium mining operations? How many other deals are happening right now that authorities haven't detected? Nuclear proliferation experts spent decades worrying about rogue nations building weapons programs. They monitored government facilities. They tracked official uranium shipments. They negotiated treaties to limit nuclear materials, but they never planned for private criminal organizations entering the nuclear materials market. Ebisawa's network proved that non-state actors can now access materials that were once controlled exclusively by governments. This changes the entire calculation for international security. But the implications go far beyond nuclear materials. Intelligence agencies started investigating potential connections between organized crime groups and terrorist organizations. These connections already exist in other parts of the world. Drug cartels providing logistics support to terrorist groups. Human trafficking networks moving operatives across borders. Arms dealers selling weapons to extremist organizations. The Yakuza have traditionally avoided terrorism. Their business model depends on stability. They make money through long-term operations that require predictable legal and political environments. Terrorism disrupts business. But what happens when economic pressure forces these organizations to expand into new markets? What happens when traditional revenue sources dry up and they need to find new clients willing to pay premium prices? Security experts worry that the boundary between organized crime and terrorism is becoming less clear. Criminal organizations have the networks. Terrorist groups have the motivation, and both have access to materials that could cause massive casualties. The economic implications are equally concerning. Yakuza operations affect legitimate markets in ways that most people never realize. When criminal organizations launder money through real estate, they distort property prices. When they manipulate stock markets, they affect pension funds and retirement savings. When they infiltrate construction companies, they influence infrastructure projects that entire communities depend on. Japan's economy loses billions of dollars annually to Yakuza operations. Money that gets diverted from legitimate businesses. Tax revenue that never reaches government accounts. Investment capital that flows to criminal enterprises instead of productive businesses. But the problem extends far beyond Japan. When Yakuza groups invest their profits in international markets, they export this economic distortion to other countries. Law enforcement agencies responded by creating international task forces. The FBI now works directly with Japanese police on Yakuza investigations. Interpol coordinates intelligence sharing between dozens of countries. Financial intelligence units track money movements across borders in real time. These cooperative efforts produced results. Joint operations shut down major trafficking networks. Coordinated investigations froze billions of dollars in criminal assets. Intelligence sharing prevented weapons deals and drug shipments. But criminal organizations adapted faster than law enforcement agencies could coordinate responses. They started using cryptocurrency to move money instantly across borders. They established operations in countries with weak regulatory systems. They built networks spanning jurisdictions that don't cooperate with international law enforcement. What keeps security experts awake at night? The knowledge that they're always one step behind. For every criminal network they shut down, two more emerge using better technology and more sophisticated methods. For every international cooperation agreement they sign, criminal organizations find new jurisdictions that don't participate in information sharing. The current threat landscape includes criminal organizations that operate like multinational corporations. They have research and development departments that study law enforcement methods. They have legal teams that exploit regulatory gaps. They have financial specialists who stay ahead of banking security measures. And they have access to materials and weapons that could reshape the global security environment in ways we're only beginning to understand. April 9, 2025. Manhattan Federal Court. Takeshi Ebisawa stood before Judge Colleen McMahon for sentencing. The man who tried to sell weapons-grade plutonium to Iran was about to learn the consequences of his actions. The prosecutors had asked for the maximum sentence, life in prison. They argued that Ebisawa's crimes represented a new category of threat to global security: nuclear materials trafficking, international weapons smuggling, drug distribution networks spanning multiple continents. Ebisawa's defense team tried to portray him as a businessman who made poor decisions. They emphasized his cooperation with authorities after his arrest. They pointed to his age and health issues. They asked for mercy. Judge McMahon was not persuaded. Her sentencing reflected the gravity of crimes that could have changed the course of international relations. Ebisawa received a sentence that ensures he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. But the Ebisawa case did more than put one criminal leader in prison. It changed how prosecutors approach organized crime cases. For decades, authorities focused on individual crimes: drug seizures, weapons arrests, financial fraud. They treated each case as a separate incident, with separate perpetrators. The Ebisawa investigation proved that modern criminal organizations operate as integrated enterprises. Nuclear materials trafficking connects to drug smuggling. Weapons deals fund money laundering operations. International networks coordinate activities across multiple jurisdictions. Prosecutors now build cases that reflect this reality. They charge entire organizations under racketeering laws. They target financial networks that support multiple criminal operations. They pursue sentences that reflect the full scope of organizational criminal activity. The legal precedent extends beyond the United States. Courts in Japan started holding Yakuza bosses personally responsible for crimes committed by their subordinates. European authorities began treating organized crime groups as terrorist organizations when they traffic in weapons of mass destruction. But legal victories don't erase the human cost of these operations. Consider the elderly Japanese women who lost their life savings to fraud schemes. They trusted voices on the telephone because those voices sounded like family. They wired money to help grandchildren who were never actually in trouble. They discovered too late that criminals had studied their personal information and used it to manipulate their emotions. Many of these victims never recovered financially. Their retirement savings disappeared. Their trust in family relationships was shattered. Some never spoke to their real grandchildren again because they couldn't distinguish between genuine calls for help and criminal deception. Consider the communities in Myanmar, where uranium mining operations destroyed the environment and funded armed conflicts. Children growing up in areas contaminated by radioactive materials. Families displaced by violence, funded through nuclear material sales. Consider the potential victims who might have been affected if Ebisawa's nuclear materials had reached their intended destinations. Cities that could have been targets. Thousands of people who might have been killed by weapons built with trafficked uranium and plutonium. The criminal justice system responded with new laws and enforcement mechanisms designed to prevent future cases like Ebisawa's. Enhanced penalties for nuclear materials trafficking, expanded authority for international investigations, better coordination between intelligence agencies and law enforcement, stronger financial monitoring systems that track suspicious money movements. New legislation allows prosecutors to charge criminal organizations under terrorism statutes when they traffic in weapons of mass destruction. Intelligence agencies received expanded authority to monitor communications and financial transactions connected to nuclear materials. International cooperation agreements streamlined information sharing between countries. Real-time intelligence coordination replaced the slow diplomatic processes that previously allowed criminal organizations to exploit jurisdictional gaps. But systemic changes take time to implement, and criminal organizations continue adapting to new enforcement mechanisms faster than authorities can deploy them.